Well, you should speak, Susie.
Oh, okay. Hey, hello and welcome to Land of the Tree, episode 4. Today we are talking about women in climate and women and the climate. All things women and environmentalism. I'm Susie. Are we not introducing ourselves? That was really awkward. All right.
I don't know. This is your direction in this episode. You're getting
Cool. All right. That's Nick and Eric. So,
Hi, Nick and Eric.
for this episode, and in honor of Women's History Month, I thought that it would be cool for our last episode of March to do something focused on women and women's contribution to environmentalism and the impact of climate change on women. So yeah, before we dive in, just a disclaimer that obviously this isn't everyone. It would be impossible to name every woman who's contributed to the environmental movement because it's been women since the dawn of time. And in my limited research, I'm sure there's like some very important people we overlooked, so don't at me on Twitter, please. I'm trying.
Actually, please add us.
Please
we want the
add
engagement.
Actually, teach us, but please be nice about it.
No, the brand. No, make us controversial, please.
But
Just don't ask Susie specifically.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
anyways, I'm getting distracted. But yeah, and again, if this seems heavily US centric, I'm sorry. We were trying to pull examples from other places. So hopefully we have a wide breadth of things to talk to you about. Anyways, okay. So to start, I just wanted to go down some examples of cool women in history. I have some facts written down, but Eric and Nick have a better memory for facts, and so they can probably like tell you other cool stuff off the top of their heads.
That's a lot of pressure. I don't know about that. We don't know things.
But yeah, so also I'm gonna post all of the sources we used on our Twitter afterwards, along with the actual PowerPoint I made, because I'm a nerd. So if you want to look at that, you can do so.
We care about research is why.
Yeah. You know, it's fitting because in this mission, we're helping a woman. We could have chosen to have her killed, but we're helping her.
Oh, in this mission, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you meant in like our
like social mission.
Twitch streams.
No, like in the game right now.
Thank you enough.
Yeah, let's not murder women today. Deal?
I managed to
I think this is a good.
Just men. We'll only murder men.
Only murder.
Oh, there's a
Murdering men
sexist
today.
man who frequents this bar. We can kill him.
Oh, let's kill him.
Yeah, I'm down.
welcome in the
Well, we can't kill. Well, no spoilers.
Can.
Can you? Oh, you can.
Depends.
All
Are you
right.
thirsty?
Kill some
Hungry?
dudes.
Both.
I'm just buying
Murder
food from
men.
her.
Murder all men. Whoops. Anyways. So, some cool women, selected women, if you will, in environmental
All right, then.
history.
Susie,
Um,
the coolest.
I wrote
The
this.
of Land of the Trees.
She's the best, but I organized this by date of birth. So we're going forwards in history. So
Perhaps you've heard of me.
starting off with Jane Addams. She was born in 1860.
I'm a bard,
At the time, there
trained at the
wasn't
Bard's
really
College
such
in
thing as like
Sullivan.
an environmental
Wonders
movement,
what
at least
things
not in the
people are
U.S. But were there at that time, she'd be
Believing
considered
it's
a
hardest.
pioneer in environmentalism. She worked a lot in environmental health concerns and advocated for like environmental and income equality. And she and her colleagues worked to uncover lead poisoning and industrial poisoning in low-income communities in the U.S. And she was the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which,
Whoa, that's crazy.
yeah, it's pretty dope. She died in 1935, so she got it sometime, like, obviously in between those years. I don't know when, but
Sometime in the early.
yeah, she's really cool. And again, was like doing this work in the U.S. or was doing this work when in the U.S. there wasn't like a huge push for environmentalism. Next woman was Rosalie Edge. She was born in 1877, and she was a woman suffragist, and she was also a species preservation advocate. At the time she was alive during the Great Depression, she was considered the U.S.'s quote-unquote most militant conservationist.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really cool.
We like her.
We like militancy.
Yeah.
She pushed for conservation to protect specifically birds in the U.S. and a wider
Amazing.
range of birds. And she founded the world's first preserve for birds of prey, which is known as Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and it still exists in Pennsylvania, which is really, really cool.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, I think I've been there, honestly,
Yeah.
probably. And she also led like grassroots campaigns in the U.S. and lobbied Congress to create national parks, along with her colleagues. So she's pretty cool. Next, we have Marjorie Stoneman Douglas,
The
queen herself. She was born in 1890, and she was really involved in a lot of aspects of environmentalism, but specifically, she was a journalist for the Miami Herald, and during that time, did a lot of work about the Everglades and the importance of preserving them.
Tell us about the Everglades, Eric.
Yeah, the Everglades is the largest subtropical wilderness area in the United States. It was also the first national park in the U.S. that was established for biodiversity preservation rather than scenic viewshed preservation. It's really cool. I'm from South Florida. I love the Everglades. Doesn't get enough credit, and it was kind of the original. This is getting a little off the topic of women, but it was like the original example of appreciation of ecosystems for their own intrinsic value. The political power structure in Florida at the time, on both the left and the right, was really committed to destroying the Everglades, draining it, and building suburbs on top of it. And that's how the ecosystem became so degraded today. But so at this time, in this context where basically everyone from both parties was actively trying to wipe out the Everglades and was basically frustrated that this ecosystem was too resilient, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was writing about how unique the Everglades really was and the value that it had. She was kind of expressing the significance of the Everglades to South Florida and how the civilization in South Florida that people love couldn't have existed without the Everglades. She's kind of like a local hero. There's actually, in the international terminal of the Miami airport, the first chapter of River of Grass, which is her book on the Everglades, is engraved on the floor of the entire terminal. And I used to walk up and down the floor of the airport reading it.
That's dope.
It's really cool. She also has a high school named after her, which was unfortunately made famous in the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And you know, in the fight for justice for those students, it's also important to remember who this namesake was and how Marjorie Stoneman Douglas herself is a really important example of people fighting for what's right. She really dedicated her life to this. My favorite anecdote about her actually is that she didn't really date until she was well into her 30s, and she told a journalist later, she lived to be like 90, she told a journalist later that all the energy that most people put into sex, she put into saving the Everglades, which is just like,
a big mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Joel M21.
Hi.
Yeah, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is dope. If you're not gonna have sex anyways, why not put that energy to environmental preservation?
Save an ecosystem. What are you doing?
Writing down a PowerPoint. Anyways,
you'll be a true
Anyway, this woman just asked for my help, so I think I have to do that now.
So the next woman is also very famous for her work in environmentalism in the U.S.
Okay, she's not here.
Rachel Carson was born in 1907, and I'm sure if you've taken an environmental class or like, I don't know, even really just a history class, you've learned about her. But her largest contribution to like the field of environmentalism was she wrote a book called Silent Spring, which is which is largely considered the thing which brought the environmental movement in the U.S. to the mainstream versus sort of just a background or sort of a tangential movement. Her book documented the effects of pesticides on the environment, specifically the pesticide DDT, and its effect on plants and animals, and was really provocative at the time, and sort of, I think, caused a lot of controversy in the U.S.
I think also it might have been, and this is completely not referenced, so I don't know, but I think it might have been the first New York Times bestseller to focus specifically on environmental protection.
I'd buy that, yeah. Also, the chemical companies that she was calling out in the book had a concerted and very sexist campaign to make her out as a hysteric. And they used a lot of gendered language, essentially saying that because she was a woman, she couldn't be trusted to make such explosive claims about the effects that these chemicals had on people's health.
Great. Corporations
great.
are dope.
But she won.
She won, and DDT
DDT's
got
banned,
and
like
then-
everywhere.
And then those same chemical companies spread a rumor that she's responsible for genocide because of the malaria or something like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know,
which
something.
she's not.
Well,
Yeah.
because DDT was used to kill mosquitoes in the
Yeah.
global south, and it is true that without DDT, the mosquito population increased in some countries, but mosquitoes were already developing immunity to it anyway. So
Yeah.
the days of DDT as an effective malaria treatment were numbered, and if you really want to treat malaria, you should focus on just giving poor people medicine and supplies to not get bitten by mosquitoes all the time.
And screens.
Yeah.
I found this out
Screens.
recently that screens are the most effective, are the reason why like the U.S. and most high-income countries don't
Shit.
have
This is the booby trap chest.
Oh,
Oh, man.
don't have malaria.
Yeah, screens are super important and
What
a pretty
weak-ass
low cost
trap.
way for
You suck.
people to be protected from malaria. All right. Anyways,
Screens are a weak ass trap if you're a small mosquito
So-
or a large one.
Rachel Carson is dope. All right. The next woman, and how do you pronounce her name again? Because I don't want to butcher this.
Wangari Maathai?
Wangari Maathai.
I think so. Disclaimer.
Yeah,
I don't
disclaimer.
speak any language from that part of the world, really. I'm incredibly ignorant.
Aren't we all?
She was born in Nairobi, in Kenya. She's really dope. So she's the founder of the Green Belt movement. And do you even know what the Green Belt movement is?
Oh, they planted.
Uh-oh,
Oh,
uh-oh, uh-oh.
Oh,
oh, never mind. Sorry. Tree planting, I believe, right?
Yeah.
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 So
Reforestation or more.
yeah, the Green Belt movement. It was founded in 1977, and they planted over 51 million trees in Kenya. So they largely work on environmental conservation and climate resilience, and specifically focusing on empowering women and girls, which is super cool. And just sort of building sustainability in communities. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her work with this organization and for her quote-unquote contribution to development, democracy, and peace. She's really cool and did a lot of good work in Kenya.
So wrote a really good book that people should. Actually, a lot of these women wrote really amazing books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you should read.
Yeah.
if you have the time.
Wangari Maathai's book is... Oh my god, what is it? I own it. I should know what it's called.
It's on your table.
I've read it, yeah. But yeah, it's great.
She wrote a book called Unbowed, a memoir.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this it kind of talks about her story and how she. Oh wow, she was the first woman to earn a PhD in East and Central Africa.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
and
she
had a
was.
university department in Kenya. Wow, she's dope. And she kind of talks about how she had run-ins with the government and how planting trees was used as a tool to empower communities and help people sort of build their own futures. So she's dope, doing some really cool work.
Yeah.
The next cool woman is Marina Silva. She was born in 1958 in Brazil to, I think, like a local... yeah, she was born in a rubber tapper family in western Brazil. And she was the first rubber tapper elected to Brazil's federal Senate. And she did a lot of really good environmental preservation work of the Amazon while she was in office, both as a senator and then as Minister of Environment
Under Lula.
under Lula.
Yeah.
And she was working for social justice and sustainable development in the Amazon. And under her tenure as Minister of Environment, between 2004 and 2007, deforestation in the country of Brazil was reduced by almost 60%.
Yeah, and Brazil is the largest tropical forest country in the world, so if you view the decline in deforestation as one unitary policy, then it's the single biggest policy contribution that any country has made to tackling climate change ever.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yep.
So have you ever seen a video of or a picture series of Brazilian deforestation? It's wild how
Yeah.
fast they do it. They used to do it.
Hello there, fellow
And
traveler.
Crazy how much
On
progress they
itinerant
made in the 10
minstrel
years that
and for a
Marina
generous
Silva and
fellow
Lula were working
traveler,
on. Oh, mostly Marina Silva, but Lula was president at the time.
he smears blessing on you.
How much progress they made versus right now is being rolled back by Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah, but Marina Silva's dope. She also helped establish the Amazon Fund.
Okay. Sorry, talking to this guy. I paid him to sing for me, but I realized I don't care.
She helped establish the Amazon Fund, which tries to prevent greenhouse gas emissions through rainforest conservation. And she resigned as Minister of the Environment, citing resistance in 2008, but she's still in the National Assembly and is still working really hard to influence environmental policy in Brazil. So she's dope. Follow her work because she's doing really good stuff. The next person we have to talk about is Winona LaDuke.
Winona.
She is a Native woman from the U.S. And she runs a nonprofit called the White Earth Land Recovery Project, which has revived the cultivation of white rice in Minnesota, which is pretty cool. And she's also co-founder of an organization called Honor the Earth, which is a Native-led organization which gives grants to Native-run environmental initiatives. Mm-hmm. And she's working to sort of educate about the need for sustainability and to help provide a model for healthy and sustainable relationship between the people and the earth. So not just for indigenous people in the land, but also just sort of a model that everyone can follow in their relationship with the earth.
Winona LaDuke is super cool. She ran for the vice presidency along with Ralph Nader in '96 and 2000. Ralph Nader is good, and I don't want to hear any other critiques about this, except he's kind of annoying. But Winona LaDuke's dope.
Yeah.
She was born in Minnesota, as her foundation would indicate. Yeah, thank you. I forgot words. And really does a lot of great work, kind of bringing the connection between indigenous rights and environmental activism to light. I think kind of in the early 70s, 80s times of environmental activism, it was kind of mostly seen as like a upper class kind of concern, and now it's kind of being more, starting with Winona LaDuke, not starting with Winona LaDuke, but as part of that, the evolving understanding of environmentalism as intersectionality. Winona LaDuke played a big part in that in her political career and her philanthropic career.
Mm-hmm. She's really cool. Yeah, and her work to empower Native-run environmental initiatives is really cool as well. Okay, next we have
I went the wrong way.
Berta Isabel Caceres Flores. Did I say that right?
Yeah,
sort of.
Yeah, pretty
cool.
Close.
All right, nice. She was born in 1971, and we actually, as part of an organization we were a part of in undergrad.
That shall remain nameless.
Very sketchy.
Yeah.
Well, the way I said that was poor. All right, so we were in
It's not on any kind of federal law enforcement list, FYI.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know how deep this thing goes.
We got to sort of run an event about her and learned about how really, really awesome she was. She's from Honduras, and she was involved from a really young age in environmentalism and environmental activism in Honduras. She founded the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras as, I think, a college student.
She was really young. Yeah.
She was really young. And this is an organization which tackled issues of sustainability in the country, and was pretty critical of the government. And kind of was talking about things like logging and destruction that was caused by plantations and dams in the country. And one of the organization's largest efforts, headed by her, resulted in the world's largest dam builder canceling a project at the Rio Gualcarque. That word.
Gualcarque?
Gualcarque, yeah, okay. A river in Honduras, which would have been environmentally destructive.
Citizen,
she won the 2015 Goldman.
Be gone.
Yeah. You got intruders in here.
We're raiding our fridge.
Okay. You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna free this prisoner.
Yeah.
That's true, because abolishing prisons.
Solidarity.
Yeah.
Solidarity.
Solidarity forever. Oh man, there's a lot.
Oh God. But yeah, so
I am not
Berta
helping you.
won the 2015 Goldman Environmental Prize for her work, but unfortunately was assassinated
by the Honduran
by the
government.
Honduran government in 2016,
Yeah.
who didn't like the work she was doing.
And some of her killers were just convicted in court, but not the person who is widely thought to have masterminded it. Oh yeah, come on, bear, saber cat, whatever you are. Just oh no.
Which is, kind of an important thing to talk about is, we'll get into this later, but there are a lot of ways in which women are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change than men are, but
Yeah.
one large way is that women in environmental activism often end up being much less secure than men are, and are much more vulnerable to retribution and reactive forces than men are, and are often put in danger just because they are participating in some form of environmental activism.
Yep. While we're on the subject, the criminalization of people who defend the environment is becoming a more and more widespread problem with all these governments around the world who don't feel the need to even pay lip service to human rights norms anymore. And it happens all over the world, especially common in Latin America, that people, often indigenous people, who defend the environment against any kind of corporate or government interest, face trumped up charges or evictions from their homes or straight up assassination campaigns. And if you want to learn more about criminalization and you want to see probably the best data set that exists on it, check out the organization Global Witness. They release a report every year about criminalization and killings against environmental defenders. We can tweet this out, but that's a quick plug for an organization that's doing a lot of really good work.
Yeah. Very important stuff. Important to talk about not just climate change and the people working in it, but sort of also the things that they face as part of their involvement and the larger issues around climate change. So one more super cool example of women in environmental history. There's a woman named Isatou Ceesay, and I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but she is from Gambia. She was born in 1972 and was frustrated with sort of the garbage that was just building up in her home community and all of the waste that she saw. So she founded an organization called the Njau, Recycling and Income Generation Group in the Gambia. She founded this in 1977. And it's a community recycling organization which takes recyclable materials from women, specifically takes donations from women. Oh my god.
Just rub.
No, we can kill it.
No!
Oh, okay. I guess we're running.
We're running!
Jesus.
Men are cowards, Susie.
Men are cowards!
Okay,
Oh yeah, go over the falls.
yeah, Isatou, she founded
Sorry, go on.
this organization that takes waste from women, sorts out the trash sorts out the recyclable materials from the trash, and then upcycles them into bags and mats, purses, all sorts of things. And as a result of her organization, over 100 women in her community are gaining income from this on a regular basis, which is a really, really cool thing. She's super supportive of...
Sorry, someone in the comments just called Nick out for being a coward.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I'm terrified of this cat. Look how
All
scary.
cats are terrifying.
Yeah, all cats are
great.
bad.
I will not hear this cat slander.
You fight the cat then.
Listen, I would, but I'm working the PowerPoint right now.
We're gonna do what I do best, which is...
I mean, it's really not... Okay. Anyways, yeah, she's doing some really cool work, working a lot on empowering women through environmentalism, which is really cool. And she is known as the Queen of Recycling in the Gambia, which is also really dope. So, these are just a few examples. I mean, there are so many more, and we're gonna send out this information.
I want to say another one because Eric reminded me about going over the falls.
Oh, yeah.
There was a woman in Iceland whose name was Sigurður Thomasdottir. I did not remember that. I just looked this up. And she is, and I don't remember the story exactly because when I was there I heard this, but this was 4 years ago. She saved one of the greatest falls in Iceland, like waterfalls, like that one, called Gullfoss, which is now a national park, but in the early 1900s it was there was a plan to convert it into a hydroelectric dam. Oh, motherfucker, is that a troll? God damn it. There was a plan to turn it into hydroelectric dam. And what she did was she organized a bunch of protest walks, I believe from Reykjavik to Gullfoss, which is a pretty far walk. It's like 75 miles or something like that. And I think when that didn't work out, she eventually threw herself over the falls. Or
Hell yeah.
right into, I can't remember which
Energy.
one. Yeah. And they ended up saving the falls.
Did she survive?
I believe she died.
Oh god, that's horrible.
Or it's horrific.
Yeah.
I think I don't actually remember whether or not she actually committed suicide, but she definitely went for it. Which is awful.
Yeah. You know, lots of people have thrown themselves over Niagara Falls in barrels and stuff.
Yeah.
Mostly not to save the environment, mostly just for fun. But you know, it's a bit of a sport.
Oh
Just
God!
people who can't deal with the pain of being from Buffalo, I guess.
Just kidding. We love Buffalo.
Do we?
Home of the
But
Buffalo Wings.
Don't. People from Buffalo don't love Buffalo.
Yeah.
Like there are some places, like people from Ohio know that the rest of the country hates it, but they have some pride. But
Yeah.
people from Buffalo just
not,
Don't even
not big
try.
on Buffalo.
Buffalo is the Ohio of New York State, which is
No, you mean?
it's next to Ohio.
it's just next to Ohio. Should be.
Oh no, I got what you mean. Okay, that actually did make grammatical sense.
Yeah, I know grammar.
All right, so yeah. Anyways, those are just a few examples of really cool women. There's so many more. You should look them up, learn about them. Women are super important in the climate movement, and often don't get as much recognition
This is true.
as men do
Yep.
because
In every movement,
sexism.
but also especially the climate movement.
On your way up the
And yeah,
7,000
so
steps
just wanted to
again.
give you some examples.
You made it. Not today.
And
Passing through
now
on your way.
I
I've
just
been
want to
to
talk
the
a little bit
monastery
about
many times,
why
but I've
women are
never even
important
laid
in
eyes
the
on one of the
environmental
graybeards.
movement and sort
Not
of
that I
broader
care to.
scale, like
Being
what
masters
women
of
have
the
done
food,
and stuff
they
like
could
that.
kill you by uttering a single word.
So the more and more,
Not that they would.
I mean,
they
this
seem
is
peaceful,
true for a lot of
but I
movements,
wouldn't
but more and
want
more
to
as we
provoke
talk about environmentalism and women's rights or women
them. Most of the
empowerment,
food supplies,
the
like
two
drive,
ideas
the
are
graybeards
becoming
tend
more and
not to
more
get out
linked.
much.
It's
Well,
really
kind of an
hard,
understanding
especially when you're
between
talking about
us.
developing
I mean, it just
countries
wouldn't feel right to
and
charge them for a bit of
increasing
preserved
like
food.
education and economic opportunities.
Trouble
It's really
is, my
hard
legs
to
aren't what they
separate
used to be.
the ideas
Climbing
of
the 7,000
environmental
steps takes its toll.
empowerment from the idea of women's
Really?
empowerment.
Well, that would be
Just said
kind
the
of
same
you.
thing twice. Anyways,
Oh, yeah, it's the last
Take
podcast.
this bag of supplies.
You
You
come
said
here-
a few times.
You come here for the mistakes, and you stay here for the empowerment.
Inside,
Yeah.
and you're done.
short TRDL, women are important, so is the environment. Help them both. But,
There's an entire. Sorry, not to cut you off. It's gonna be like the worst example of what we were just talking about.
Yeah, are women important, Nick?
They are. Well, I was gonna say something we aren't. I don't think we are gonna talk about, right? But I feel like is a cool thing to mention is that there's an entire field of like environmental feminism that's like super dope.
Yeah.
yeah,
We should.
ecofeminism and environmental feminism, two slightly different ideas, and I think they have to do with
Well, there's
whether
the
it's
occasional
just
wolf pack
women
stray, but that's all I've ever had to
who
deal
are
with.
feminists
Other than that, watch
working
your
in
footing.
environment versus like
Conditions, the stairs can be treacherous.
specifically
Honestly,
the connection
I'm not
between the
certain.
two. Both are
Can't be
legitimate and
allowed
different.
to, honestly.
But yeah, really cool stuff. We can also
Do an episode on ecofeminism one day.
Yeah.
That's gonna take
do
some research.
Yeah, the basic research we did for today did not cover
The
environment.
basic notion of ecofeminism, as far as I remember it, and sorry if I'm completely fucking this up, but it's that the same patriarchal structures that led to the exploitation of the environment are the same patriarchal structures that lead to the exploitation and oppression of women across the world are the same that lead to the exploitation and oppression of the environment as a general concept.
Yep, pretty much. So there are connections between the domination of nature and the exploitation of women. And that's actually, okay, I actually did touch on that a little bit. That's,
sweet.
That's a good
I am the worst.
segue.
Sorry.
No, I didn't label it as ecofeminism, but basically the idea is that in many places women and the environment are both seen as exploitable resources. Women in, the ways that they're supposed to like comport themselves in traditional gender roles and the quote unquote like resources that they're supposed to provide to men in society in terms of like their role in the house and their role for providing children and whatnot, and obviously the environment as an unlimited resource that people can take from, and kind of the idea that both of these come from like a very like a misogynistic and power differential relationship, and yeah, I don't know. I would have to do more research to talk about it more fully, but yeah, the idea is that they are seen as similarly exploitable, and we need to sort of challenge both of those ideas, that one, women are not objects to exploit and don't owe anything to society or to men or to anyone, and also that nature in similar ways should not be a resource that we exploit endlessly.
Yeah, we say as Nick kills all the goats.
Except in Skyrim. In Skyrim, there's no climate change, and
Well, there was the Oblivion Crisis. We want to get into the lore.
And the dragons are a type of climate change in that they change
Yeah.
the climate of the times.
I guess that's true. Okay, there is climate change. Don't kill goats. In
Yeah,
Skyrim.
and that's why we play Skyrim while we talk about climate change.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not as well versed on the lore as you guys are.
Thank
Keep an eye
God
out
for you.
for wolves.
Yeah, you have a life.
Yeah.
Jinx.
Jinx.
I did.
But yeah, basically
Strange
women
days when the monks
women are
would do
inherent
that.
to the ideas of sustainable
I wonder what it
development
means.
and environmental activism. One thing to talk a lot about specifically in like the developing world is that women are often responsible for like agricultural production or domestic food production and farm work. But there's also inequality in land ownership in a lot of places. Women are prevented from accessing land, but they're also left to tend the land. And due to kind of women's role as like not owners but tenders of the land, women tend to have a better sort of understanding of natural systems and a better kind of relationship with the environment.
Yep. The way that climate change and environmental degradation specifically play into the issues of inequality in women's land ownership is that a woman might be lucky enough to find herself in a stable situation where she tends her patch of land, and she might not really normatively have ownership over that land. But that doesn't come into play until there's some kind of crisis, until either a company tries to acquire the land for some kind of development, or climate change causes the land's arability to decline and they need to migrate and find new land. And when that kind of thing happens, when land is disrupted, it's often women who get the short end of the stick in response, and it's women who see their social standing decline the most when a community loses their land. In many cases, a company might be legally required to compensate a community for land that they take from that community to develop something, but it might just be the head of household who gets the compensation, which means the men get it, and not all men are willing to share this resource equitably with their wives. And it's also important to note that there are a couple of different ways that people can own land. You can own it individually as a family, or you can own land collectively as a community. You can be a community of a few hundred people who own land and manage it sustainably through all of these very old systems of community governance. And that's really great. It's a great and usually sustainable way to own land. But women can be excluded under both types of land ownership, whether it's private or collectivized. Women often don't have as much of a voice as men do in the governance of land. And that's always a problem no matter what, but it becomes a lot more significant when climate change is rapidly changing communities' relationship to the land and their ability to use it to meet their needs. Yeah. Did we have more to say on women's land rights? Or,
No, that kind of
Cool.
covered everything I was going to talk about.
I'm sorry. I thought you were moving on to another topic.
No. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, I don't...
Get on the screen.
Yeah. You're just going to drop things and say mansplaining.
One example that just came to mind as Eric was talking, I went to a talk with someone who worked...
Sorry.
I don't even remember what country this was in. I think it was somewhere in Eastern Africa. And this woman was talking about land ownership for women and the way sort of like agricultural production worked. And women in this community were given plots of land to tend to produce food for their families, and the men would tend the land that produced food that the families would then sell and use, for profit or whatever. But women were given the worst pieces of land. They were given the least productive and the hardest to grow on. Yeah, that's how you say that. And so oftentimes women would grow, I think, women would grow rice rather than the very productive and economically stable grains, because that's what these little plots of land would grow. And they would still be controlled by their husbands. They just would be quote unquote allowed to produce food on this land. And as they sort of overused and over processed these small pieces of land, they would be shunted onto worse and worse sort of agricultural plots while their husbands continued to prosper on the larger and more productive plots of land, which would contribute to negative health benefits for their families, and the women often didn't see the profits of the men's agricultural efforts. So yeah, I don't know, just to add on to an example of how that inequality kind of plays out in real life. Of course, this isn't everywhere, as Eric said. Women can be involved in healthy ways in land management and sustainable agriculture, but oftentimes it does not happen that way. Yeah, so that's a lot of. I mean, there's a lot more ways that women are important in the environmental movement. This is just, I don't know. I think agriculture and economic prosperity is a really important piece of that. One actually good example of an organization doing some really cool work is this organization called the BOMA Project, and they operate in Kenya, and they're working on microfinance for women to increase sustainability and specifically environmentally sustainable projects and entrepreneurships owned by women. But because I know there's a lot of controversy over microfinance and whether it really works, this organization has a really cool model of, first of all, they do a lot of business teaching and a lot of education around sort of entrepreneurship for women, which is really, really cool. A lot of microfinance programs just sort of dump money on women and then come back in 3 years with really high interest rates and asking for their money back. I was actually reading an article today about women in Jordan, Jordan refugee camps, who were using their savings to pay for the microfinance loans and could only afford to use the loans for their day-to-day needs versus actually starting businesses. So the BOMA project has a really long time frame. I think it's 6 years for a project to be finished. And they do a lot of education, and then they also do this really cool thing where women are put into groups, and profits are put into a collective, basically bank, but a collective kind of credit sharing institution where women are taught how to manage finances and then are given agency on their own to sort of co-manage this themselves and decide who gets to invest or take money out and share resources equitably. And they have a 96% graduation and success rate from their program. I think it's only been up for 8 years or something, but 96% success rate is crazy high. And they have a slightly smaller success rate for maternal graduation. I think it's 86%. But yeah, the BOMA project is doing some really cool work in helping women in Kenya start sustainable businesses. So that's a really cool example if you're looking for something to sort of be happy about, women and sustainability. And now Nick is going to talk about why climate change disproportionately affects women.
Wait, right now?
Yeah, right now.
Oh god, okay.
While you kill the frost
Here,
troll.
wait.
Here, switch.
Yeah, I'm going to take over.
Okay, so why are women disproportionately affected by climate change? Sorry, I'm still reeling from that frost troll. What?
Sorry.
So, Why does climate change disproportionately affect women? I mean, the really, not to sound glib, but like the really like short version of it is that just sexism causes women to be much more vulnerable for living in much worse conditions, have less access to resources than men do. There we go.
Your body just falls
Ow.
all the way down.
So much there. But so to get more specific, or to give some examples, for example, in the wake of the 2004 tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami that affected Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Oxfam found that the number of men surviving versus the amount of women surviving out was men outnumbered women who this is hard for them to say. Surviving men outnumbered women by almost 3-to-1 in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and India, which is for several reasons, but it's mostly just because the infrastructure set up in those specific countries, but also most countries, makes it harder for women to survive when crises happen. One of the best examples for the United States is in Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, 83% of single mothers weren't able to return home to Katrina after 2 full years. And about 2/3 of the jobs lost because of Katrina permanently were lost by women. And these are structural factors that, while not necessarily intentionally harming women in terms of climate change, make crises that happen much more affecting towards women than men. I remember I'm from the New York metropolitan area, and when Hurricane Sandy hit, I had a couple of friends who were living in a shelter that they lost, or they temporarily lost their homes. And one of the things that I never thought about as, a shitty 16-year-old was the fact that shelters don't have most good sanitary provisions in general, but we're certainly not equipped to handle women's sanitary needs, specifically around menstruation. And that's not a luxury. That's something women need. What the fuck? Why are they attacking you?
I don't know. Wait, why are you?
Yeah, what?
Is it Frost Troll following him? Oh my god.
Oh, yeah.
Oh wow, they
just
got him.
Killed him for me.
Nice.
I wouldn't be so sure about that.
Shit.
Anyway, it's not a luxury. Just recently have schools become hip to the game that young women need to have tampons and pads and
For things that you shouldn't have to fucking pay
yeah, exactly.
like hundreds and hundreds and some would say thousands of dollars a year for.
Yeah, especially when you're 16 and can't access that kind of money.
Yep.
And so a lot of the women that I knew, or at that time girls, they were 16, living in those shelters, couldn't just go out to CVS and buy pads or tampons because A, most of the CVSs were closed because of the storm, and B, because they just didn't have that kind of money. And that's not. That's just another way of. Jesus. Oh, I thought you were just fighting them. There's just another way that climate change kind of stresses these structural factors that affect women. The UN estimates that about 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. In rural areas, for example, when crops get less productive, when drought happens or floods happen, men often leave the community to make money in towns, leaving women behind to act as sort of tenders to the land if they weren't already doing that in the first place. And when that land no longer becomes possible to live on, those women are then displaced. Globally, women are more likely to experience poverty and have less socioeconomic power than men in general. And kind of this balance in power, I was reading a thing kind of preparing for this, and something that I read, a quote that I read that I very much disagree with, said that climate change isn't about power, it's about taking care of our planet. And while taking care of our planet is important, climate change is absolutely about power. Climate change is absolutely about who has the most power and who will survive these crises that are going to happen. Because in the end, it's not going to be the people that have power that are going to be dealing with this the most, and it's going to be poor rural women of color who are going to be bearing the brunt of this crisis and are currently bearing the brunt of this crisis. And that's kind of my piece on that. I mean, we could go into depth on this for this is an entire class, but that's kind of just some examples of that.
Women are also often more heavily impacted by health issues and nutrition issues and sort of like access to care that is more often provided to men than it is to women, and these things compound climate issues. I think we were talking about the tsunami.
Yeah.
In was
as well as Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Talking about flooding in Bangladesh, and sort of the way that women might have been more heavily impacted by that specific crisis than men. Women are often responsible for providing food for their families, providing water for their families, and sort of doing day-to-day tasks like cooking and cleaning, caring for their kids. Women are often experience lower levels of nutrition than men do, and will often go out of their way to feed their children first before they're fed. And so in situations like that, women are already experiencing lower levels of nutrition and health than men are. And also, when you are expected to, say, go out and get water for your family, you are much more frequently coming into contact with infected water where you could pick up diseases or come into contact with chemicals. You're also more insecure just being a woman because, people take the opportunity of disasters sometimes to sort of prey on the more vulnerable, which is often women walking around, in areas that have experienced disaster are, I think, sometimes more likely to be assaulted.
Yeah.
Especially if outside, workers, I hate to say aid workers because that sort of perpetrates this negative stereotype of aid workers, but oftentimes it is like peacekeepers or aid workers who take advantage of women and assault them as well. So those are just some examples, but there are a lot of ways in which disasters caused by climate change, droughts caused by climate change, health issues compounded by climate change, especially affect women in ways that they don't necessarily affect men.
Yeah. And I think also the role of women as a primary caregivers to children, which is so frequently kind of just assumed that they're going to do. I mean, children are extraordinarily vulnerable to everything: disease, climate change, war. I mean, everything that affects a human being will affect a child 10 times more. And if you're the primary caregiver of a child, you're going to put yourself into protecting that child. And like, that's such a major factor of how women are more affected, because if you are a mother, you are essentially expected to bear the brunt of 2 lives' worth of disaster. And you're one person putting your energy into protecting 2, 3, 4, however many kids you have, because that's what's expected of you. And that's why I think, and we really should just do an episode on ecofeminism, because there's so much intersection there between what women are expected to do by this role that's been kind of forced upon them, and how that affects, and how climate change is kind of stressing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot more to talk about, and I'm sorry this isn't more comprehensive, but
we're working on it.
Yeah. And again, there's too much to even talk about in 10 episodes, let alone 2. Yeah. But again, we're going to send out some links, and you guys should absolutely read up on this. We'll try to find those books that we were talking about and recommend those. There's some really cool classes you can take as well. Check like your local university or like your library, or I don't know. I know UU churches, shout out, do some really cool work around climate change, organizing, women's empowerment, and sort of the role of communities of color and indigenous communities in climate change as well, because it's important to to not just talk about these issues from like a Western perspective, because again, Western communities are the ones that created most of these problems and are doing the least to fix it, and a lot of indigenous communities and indigenous women are bearing the brunt of climate activism and the brunt of the implications of climate change with having like the least responsibility for these issues.
Yeah.
So
Yep. A nice note to mention is, do you guys know what the, or what many scientists have determined is the single biggest policy you can initiate worldwide to reduce fossil fuel emissions?
women's education?
Close. Well, that's related to it, but specifically access to contraception and reproductive rights and an end to the stigmatization of the use of those things.
That's good.
Yeah, if you can control how many children you want to have, then you can control the level of environmental exploitation in your community.
Yeah.
It's also a huge translation into empowerment and the ability to get an education. So,
Just be careful with issues around population and
Yeah.
yeah.
women's reproductive rights, because a lot of that is like bullshit. That is, I don't know, bullshit
Yeah, well-
used to control populations of
A lot of the population control people are the ones that are trying to say we should sterilize poor women who live in Africa and South Asia. Like,
Well, I should clarify. People who say that population control is the problem and put the agency on poor communities blame them for having too many children
yeah,
without
yeah. I'm not
assessing
saying
the
yeah,
problem by the
absolutely.
problem.
Yeah.
But it is very important for environmental justice that women are able to control what
absolutely.
happens
reproductive
in their
justice
families.
is extraordinary.
and it's super important for just like women's rights and like diverging even from just like the environmentalist perspective of it. Like, obviously women everywhere
But
should
beware
have a
that your
choice of
skill
what to
does
do
not
with their bodies and
outstrip your
agency on that, and like
You are now ready
giving
for your
agency to
last
women in
trial.
every aspect of their
Retrieve
lives,
the
but
horn of
especially
Jürgen
in like sex,
Pollard,
sexuality,
founder
and
of
reproductive
his
rights is
throne,
so
the
important.
ancient fame of
Um,
Wollstonecraft.
And allowing women to have
Remain true to the
education
way of
and
the voice.
control. I mean, like, if you read like development theory, like they talk about giving, like, empowering women
No
and
doubt,
specifically
the
giving
appearance of
women
a
access to
dragonborn of
education
this
as
time
like
is not an
a
accident.
major determining factor
Your
in what can like
destiny is
increase a
surely
country's development
up.
levels
You
and
should
GDP,
focus on honing your
like
voice,
health
and soon
levels.
your
Really,
path will be
everything
made
is
clear.
like
Yeah.
tied to
Good.
empowering
Then you will be
women.
ready for whatever lies
But
ahead.
also environmental movements. I mean,
When
if
Yeah.
we're not working on women's giving women power in environmentalism, then we are failing.
Yeah, I think that it goes like to make a larger point that I don't know. I just want to say like if you're not empowering people and you're not using climate education to like, you know, we're doing an episode on women now because yes, women are important to the environmental movement, but also just like it's the right thing to do. Like they like empowering like. Why are you working on climate change if you don't want to empower people? Like, why are you trying to protect a society that isn't working towards empowering people?
And
I think working towards equality. And I think that a lot of environmentalists, especially like old timey ones, like very much were most like a lot about like, oh, like we've got to like protect the earth for like what it is and the natural thing that it is, and like that's bullshit. Like people are so important. Like we've got to make sure that people are protected, and that means giving them rights and power.
Yeah, environmentalism cannot just be about protecting the pure environment, because one, there's no such thing as the pure environment. Humans are inherently and intrinsically a part of the environment, but also like
I didn't mean to do that. I thought I could slide my way down the mountain like a beautiful downhill skier.
down the cliff face.
Yeah.
But yeah, people are a really important part of the environment too, and allowing people to have access to their resources is really important. I had something else I was going to say, but I was distracted by Eric falling off the cliff.
Well, maybe I'm not very good at this game. Sorry.
Beautiful aurora borealis.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so pretty. Oh,
This is like the first time in the game that you see it, I think.
I know what I was going to say. So I know we were trying to wrap this up, but just one kind of important note on
We're
like
the masters of our own time.
women's role in feminism. As I was doing research for this, and I didn't read the articles because I wanted to be happy about this episode for now. There, like, even just within like the mainstream normal environmental movement, there's like a ton of sexism, even just within like work that people are doing. And like, there was an article I came across where this woman said like, I had to leave the environmental movement because everyone she talked to, like the males in her sort of organization that she was interacting with, would call her cute and call her work fun and like, oh, you know, like performative, like look at what you're doing. And just like, if you're going to work in any space, but specifically because we're talking about environmentalism, and I think that in some ways I've experienced this as well, where people tend to be very dismissive of your credentials or your thoughts or something just because you tend to be a woman. Shout out to people I've worked with before. It's been super fun. You like these are issues that obviously need to be addressed on like a really large and systematic level and like all across the world, but also like really take the time to examine the work that you're doing, and like if what you're doing is like being intersectional, and if you're like treating the women in your organization well, and like maybe, you know, try to reevaluate if you're like talking over people or discounting the things that women say, or like not actively working to like give women a space in your organization, because that is also super important. And like teaching, it shouldn't like, we shouldn't have to like teach women how to like make their own space in these or like environmental organizations, but unfortunately for now that's like what it is. But like men especially need to be doing a lot more work to like help kind of create a space for women and for people of color and for like, you know, other types of intersectionality in the environmental movement. So
Yeah.
that's my PSA. Do more work and check your privilege.
Yeah. That's a good closing note as we watch Nick get attacked by these toxic men.
All right, let's do it.
Oh yeah, check out the DLC. This is cool.
I'm gonna get it. I don't want to fight these guys. Hey, where are the guards?
Should we leave on
guards?
Should we leave on a cliffhanger?
Oh, you think you can call the cops on them?
Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger? All right,
Or leave on him
cliffhanger.
humiliatingly dying.
Cliffhanger.
Oh, thanks guys. Check our Twitter feed for all our sources.
At Land of the Trees with an S, because we messed up and didn't get the original one.
And check out our dope logo also, which is Land of the Tree with no S.
Yeah.
And do some research, and we'll see you next week.